to give a little bit of background about the Newman Prize for Chinese Literature. Once again, my name is Peter Gries, and I direct the Institute for U.S.-China Issues, and we host the Newman Prize every other year. And I think what I want to do is limit my comments to a few observations about the festival that has occurred over the last couple of days. There are a number of things that have been said that by different participants in the festival that really resonated with me, and I wanted to share them with you. And the first was an exchange that occurred at the salon yesterday afternoon that was conducted in Chinese. And I think the very first question that was addressed to Wang Anyi was actually, it was very moving to find out, but there was a group of high school students in Green Bay, Wisconsin, who had been reading one of Wang Anyi's translated works, and they submitted questions by email, which then Professor Zhu asked. And one of them was, Ms. Wang Anyi, how do you hope that your work will be received by non-Chinese audiences, such as American students? What do you hope that they will learn from engaging your work? And her answer was very simple, and it was to say that she hoped that her readers outside of China would come to realize how similar we all are. That when push comes to shove, we're all human. And Professor Dai Jinhua from Beijing University, later in the very same salon yesterday afternoon, made a very similar kind of observation about Wang Anyi's prose, that while it relishes in the very particular of the Shanghai context, it really celebrates our common humanity. And it really focuses in on that kind of a humanistic message. And when I heard that, I was so gratified because it reminded me of one of the main reasons that I decided to try to create a prize for Chinese literature in the Anglophone world. And in fact, if you would like to, you can open up to the back side of your program, and you'll see that the first sentence of our charter, which is the first paragraph on the back of your program, the Newman Prize for Chinese Literature is awarded biennially in recognition of outstanding achievement in prose or poetry that best captures the human condition and is conferred solely on the basis of literary merit. So I could talk at length about the different components of that, but what I want to focus on tonight briefly is this idea of capturing the human condition. So why is that important? I'm a political psychologist trained in political science, and most of what I do is look at the day-to-day of U.S.-China relations, and it can be a daunting day-to-day. We have a serious lack of mutual understanding and trust in bilateral U.S.-China relations, and certainly what we hear in the press and what we see in social media is dominated by discourses of difference. And actually, just earlier this afternoon, Ban Wang from Stanford, where's Ban? There he is, also spoke about this, that there's so much emphasis in conversations about U.S.-China relations on difference. In the U.S., we have Orientalist discourses that often infantilize and exoticize Asia and China. And in China, there are similar Occidentalist discourses that seek to construct China as somehow uniquely peaceful nation and America as this evil hegemonic foil, the exact opposite. So these kinds of discourses of difference are ascendant, and they contribute to the lack of mutual trust and understanding. And one of the reasons I was excited to create this literary prize was the hope that culture could be a vehicle for doing what Wang Anyi has done, at least according to her answer and Professor Dai, which is through her work emphasize that which we all share. Some of us may be Chinese and some of us may be American, but we are all human beings. And we all confront the basic challenges of the human condition. And so I'm thrilled that we are going to be celebrating the work of Wang Anyi today. given that that has been one of the core aspects of her writing. I do want to share just one more. As a political psychologist, I draw heavily from the work of social psychologists, and I just want to share one finding from that literature with the group. And in part, I want to do so because this afternoon at the end of our Q&A, I think we were all maybe a little bit pessimistic about just how much of a difference culture can make. And I want to share with you a finding that tells us a little bit about how things like novels, well-written literature, just exactly how those promote this view of our common humanity and therefore oppose discourses of difference that undermine mutual trust and understanding. And I'm going to get at this kind of backdoor through something we're familiar with, the civil rights movement in the United States. Many of you are aware that one of the core policies that came out of the civil rights movement in the United States was busing. And the idea behind busing was, you have black students in the inner cities and you have white students in the suburbs, and we just need to give them an opportunity to interact more. So we'll bus white kids in and black kids out, and you'll have more interaction, more contact. The idea was called the contact hypothesis. More intergroup contact, and you'll reduce prejudice. Well, did it work like that? Not exactly. It turned out that contact alone was indeterminate. Sometimes contact, if it's well handled, can reduce prejudice between different racial groups, but sometimes it can actually make things worse. And when you think about the world we live in today in the context of globalization, where direct and indirect contacts between the peoples of the world are increasing exponentially, it's pretty clear that contact alone is not reducing prejudice. It's creating opportunities for more prejudice to emerge. So social psychologists got very interested in trying to figure out, well, what are the specific conditions that are conducive to reducing prejudice? How do you get increased contact to lead to less stereotypes, less prejudice, less conflict? And one of their core findings was that empathy or perspective taking is one of the key mechanisms. If through increased contact between different groups, people can come to see the world from the perspective of the other, that will, and they do so consistently, in a sustained way, in a comfortable setting, that is not threatening to their own identities, this can genuinely reduce prejudice. Furthermore, there's additional research that has shown that a good novel performs exactly this function. I'm not talking about the trash novel in the airport, but a good novel, like the kind that Wang Anyi writes, allows you to get inside the head of the protagonist. And when I heard about this high school class in Green Bay, Wisconsin, reading Wang Anyi's Baotown, a translation of one of her novels, and all excited about it and asking questions about it, I was just imagining all these young Americans entering into the world of this Chinese protagonist half a world away. And it reminded me of an experience that was very influential for me, that I've shared with some of you earlier. But as a third-year student, third-year Chinese language student in summer school at Middlebury College a number of years ago, I was so thrilled when I could finally read a Lu Sun short story on my own, in Chinese completely, an entire short story in Chinese. And what really just amazed me is how I could relate to these protagonists of AQ that were separated from me just so far, both physically across an ocean, usually set 100 years in the past, often peasants, where I was a student, completely different environment. And yet, as I read Lu Sun's work, and I could even relate to some of his sort of farcical figures, like the famous AQ, who was famous for his, was called a Jingshen Shenli Fa, his technique of sort of psychological victory. He was a down on his luck, poor peasant who always got beat up, And he had this trick that he used after he got beat up. He would then slap himself and pretend that he was the one who did the slapping and that he had actually hit the other guy. And believe it or not, I could relate to that. I was able to get into the mind and relate to the situation that this protagonist was in. And so I very much have found that literature in psychology that shows that perspective taking and empathy are a key mechanism through which we can reduce intergroup prejudice. And so I'm thrilled to hear, and this just came out of nowhere, that our experts over the last couple days during the festival have highlighted how this year's Newman laureate, Wang Anyi, her work in particular seems to promote that kind of empathy and perspective taking by presenting us with protagonists that allow us to engage with our common humanity. And to the extent that the Newman Prize encourages more non-Chinese to read Wang Anyi's work and enter into the mind's eye of her Chinese protagonists, I hope this is an argument in favor of, hopefully culture can play a positive role in combating discourses of difference and epistemologies of difference, to promote an understanding of our shared humanity and therefore promote greater mutual trust and understanding in U.S.-China relations. So I'll take my preacher's hat off. Okay.